Well, hello, everybody, and good evening in the UK, good morning in the United States, and wherever you are, good day. This is the Noble Manhattan's Adolescent and Child Coaching Support Group, our monthly meeting. We meet on the second Wednesdays as and when we can. And today we're absolutely delighted to have Dr. Eric Maisel with us. Now, Eric has been coaching for many, many years. I'm not going to say how many. That's his secret. But in particular, he has been involved in a thing called creativity coaching. And this is an area that actually has got greater boundaries than just people who think about creativity as art or music or performance and things like that. Because even in business, in order to stay ahead, business leaders have got to think ahead. They've got to be creative in their plans. But also, creativity falls into another area, and that is, in my mind, is neurodiversity, and that's really where I'm coming in, because there's a tremendous amount of need for support for those who are neurodiverse. Now, that in itself is a term that probably needs explaining. So Eric has very kindly come along to give us his wisdom on the subject. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome you, Eric, and thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, Ian. I'm glad to be here.
Now, let's have a look at a couple of definitions first, because different things mean different things to different people. And the idea of neurodiversity, what means that to you? What do you mean by neurodiversity?
Yeah, we've got a long story here, I think. This isn't the short version because it connects to several different big ideas. First is the very idea of mental disorder and difference associated with mental disorder. From my point of view, there aren't mental disorders. Those are labels that have been assigned to certain sets of behaviors by the American Psychiatric Association in the United States and the International Classification for Diseases around the world. They've produced two documents, those organizations. There's the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. Let me just give you the headlines here. In real medicine, you diagnose by virtue of causes. You're interested in what's causing the thing. It should sound like it goes without saying, and it should go without saying. If I show you a bruise, you want to know if I bumped into a tree or if I have cancer. You're not going to call it bruisitis. That isn't just because I have that symptom doesn't allow you to define what I've got till you know more. In the mental disorder paradigm, there's no interest in causation. That will sound weird to folks on the call, but there's no interest in causation. There's only an interest in accumulating symptoms and making a symptom picture out of them. As to why those symptoms ought to go together, that's never explained because there is no explanation. Why should gaining weight or losing weight and feeling tired and 2 or 3 other things equal clinical depression? No particular reason except that they often are seen together. That's why it's called a diagnostic and statistical manual rather than a diagnostic and treatment manual. It's that things are regularly seen together. So I know I'm going on, but I want to get to the place of trying to understand why things like ADHD or clinical depression or bipolar are merely labels and do not explain anything. They have no explanatory power. So that's A. B, the idea of neurodiversity requires some sense of a theory of personality, theory of who we are. But it doesn't usually come with a theory of who we are. I have a very simple model of personality, which I want to share, which is that personality is made up of 3 parts: original personality, formed personality, and available personality. The first original personality is how we come into the world, and that's where neurodiversity comes in as an idea. We come into the world already ourselves. Anybody who's had kids or puppies or kittens knows that every creature is already itself. You can call that diversity if you like. That's just a little bit of extra unneeded language, but we come into the world ourselves, individual and unique. Some of us are going to come into the world with the kind of attributes that, when put together, will look like, let's say, just to pick one, ADHD. It's going to look like that. It's not going to be a mental disorder, but it's going to fit the criteria for that label. So what's going on there? If you come into the world with smarts, maybe some extra life energy, some extra chi, some extra passion, some extra stubbornness, some extra good reality testing, you're going to be a creative person. That's who you're going to be. Just parenthetically here, in the literature, there are about 75 traits of the creative personality. So clearly, I'm not mentioning everything that makes up a creative person, but just some headlines like stubbornness and individuality and intelligence and this, that, and the other thing, all put together, make the creative person. So you're going to come into the world, this person with a ton of energy. And because school is not going to do anything to help you use that energy wisely, it's going to only invite you to draw within the lines and know facts for tests and what have you. In other words, it's going to bore you silly if you're this person. School will bore you silly, so you will start bouncing off walls. And you are almost certainly going to get that ADHD label. Just by virtue of the fact that you're a creative person, a creative kid with lots of energy, who has no real place to put that energy. Put that kid on a farm and let him run around all day long. You won't see him all day long. He'll have no problem. He'll be at the lake for 2 hours and wrestling with his friends for 2 hours, and he'll be back hungry, and he will have had a perfect day. And there'll be no ADHD to be seen. But put him in a church pew, or try to sit him down at the dining room table, or try to put him in a classroom, and suddenly he's constrained and needs to bounce off walls. So I don't know if I can summarize precisely, but to circle all the way back around, we all come into the world with an original personality. You can call that neurodiversity if you like. I don't think that helps matters to have that additional languaging of a reality. If we are not looking for explanations, which psychiatry does not look for, if we're not looking for explanations, then we're only looking for descriptions of things, and that doesn't tell us enough. We do not know enough about what's going on to say sensible things about things like autism or ADHD or pediatric depression, comma. And if you hate school, that can't be a mental disorder. It's unfair to call hating school a mental disorder. Or if your parents bully you, it's unfair to say you have a mental disorder. You are in a stressful situation that's harming you, but you don't have a mental disorder. So by being unwilling to look at what's going on, both the DSM and the ICD are not interested in what's going on. No interest in what's called etiology and what's going on. No interest. Since there's no interest in what's going on, all that's going on is a certain kind of labeling process, which then gets you powerful chemicals. That's what happens next. You get the label. You're provided with a label. And then you get a tremendously powerful chemical called medication. It's not medication because there was no disease found. So it's not real medication, but it's a powerful chemical with effects. And now you are ready for an addiction. Oh, opioid addiction. Where'd that come from? Well, let's give kids 3 or 4 or 5 powerful psychiatric meds for no reason. Let's do that and see how well kids do. Let's see if they're suicidal then or prone to addiction. Of course they will be. So in trying to deconstruct the idea of neurodiversity, I think we have to come up against the mental disorder paradigm that is currently prevalent, announce that it's fraudulent, illegitimate. You can't diagnose on the basis of symptom pictures. You diagnose on the basis of causation. That's what real medicine does. So there's a big illegitimate thing happening here that lands us in the place of millions of kids and their parents pressured into taking chemicals that they ought not to be taking. I know that was a mouthful. I think I'll put a period there and see where you want to go next. I don't hear you, Ian.
It would help if I unmute myself, wouldn't it?
Yes.
That's truly an intriguing picture, Eric, that you're painting here, because I think I can understand that, from what you're saying, that, I mean, we all know that everybody is unique. It's more a case of how really, I suppose, to fit into the society, perhaps. And perhaps do you feel that it could be society boundaries that are causing us to corral these people?
Much of this are social management issues. If you have 3 kids rushing through the house, banging into walls, or doing this or doing that, or you have one sort of sad-looking daughter and one anxious-looking son and what have you, you want to be of some help. Now, it may be the case that the help that ought to be offered is very different from what society currently offers, but you want to be of some help, so you will turn to the professionals, the mental health professionals who are engaged in a social constraint role. That is what they're doing. They're trying to fit kids into the system. And so parents will be pressured into believing that something called diagnosing and treating is going on. By the way, parenthetically, it should strike anyone interested in the subject as peculiar that the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, is completely silent both on causation, which I've already mentioned, but it's also silent on treatment. And of course, it's silent on treatment because it doesn't know what's going on. Treatment needs to connect to an actual illness, some kind of mechanism. If you don't have any mechanism to turn to, then of course you don't know how to treat it. So that's why it's silent on treatment. So we're not talking about treatment here. We're talking about providing powerful chemicals which have effects, which is not treatment, providing a lifelong label, which maybe gets you accommodations or some other things in a social setting, in a school setting. So you can tell that I don't think that what's going on is helpful for kids or helpful for parents, but it does serve the needs of society to keep kids controlled and constrained. There's also a more nefarious part to this, which is that many groups, many kinds of kids are going to be more often labeled with these mental disorders than other kinds of kids. Kids in care are going to be more often labeled so that they can be tranquilized with drugs. Here, the Native Americans have for hundreds of years been designated as feeble-minded. That was the way to keep them down. Well, we can't use that language anymore, so let's give them mental disorders now. Let's give them ADHD or something else and give them chemicals based on that kind of labeling. So there's a big social suppression part to the current mental disorder paradigm. I know that we were to be more towards creativity, but here's where we are.
That's all right. I was just going to come into that, actually. So how does creativity connect in view of what you said, which is a lot of it's actually quite disconcerting?
Well, it ought to be disconcerting. I think there are millions of kids who are being harmed by the system. So it should be disconcerting. And I think there are millions of adults. If you hate your job or need a divorce, that's not a mental disorder. And to think that there's a pill, you might as well say drink scotch. If the idea is to take your mind off things, well, we know how to do that. And we have many chemicals that can take your mind off things. So it should be disconcerting. By the way, just as a metaphor or as a mental picture, if a raging rhino is coming at you, we know how to tranquilize it. You shoot it with a dart. We can put it down. But that doesn't mean that we understand why it was raging or why it was rushing at you. We have no clue as to what it was doing. We just have a mechanism to tranquilize it. And a lot of what goes on in the mental disorder world is that we have mechanisms for tranquilizing and controlling and doing something about symptoms, but that's not really okay. So yeah, there's a lot to be worried about here. But so let's turn to creativity for a second. So if we look at this kid, we can call him neurodiverse, but let's just call him creative. Kid pops out of the womb. Probably in that, I'm just making up a number, 5% of the population is one in 20, this kid. That's just a made up number. We have no idea what percentage of humanity is born with this creative personality made up of these many different traits, but some percentage are. So this child will come into the world smarter than the next person. Yes, we get to say that because it's legit that intelligence spreads over a normal curve. So some people are smarter than other people. Whether that's comfortable or uncomfortable to say, that's the truth. Come into the world smarter, come into the world more prone to demand that he or she be the individual he was born to be. What's going to start almost instantly is that this child is stubborn. One of the traits of the creative personality is a certain kind of stubbornness. Stubbornness to spend a lifetime writing novels that no one is publishing, or writing poetry that makes you no money, or a certain kind of stubbornness and passion. And a lot of life energy, which translates into appetite, which translates into possibility for addiction. If you've got large appetites, it may not just be an appetite for writing your novel. It might be an appetite for peanuts or heroin or something worse. So you're coming into the world, this individual, and almost immediately you're going to start to butt heads with your universe. You're going to start to be oppositional, or you may hide all of that oppositional energy. You might be the nice girl who's oppositional inside, or the rowdy boy who's oppositional outside, but both are oppositional inside. They're feeling at odds with their universe, which of course leads to, as an adolescent, alienation, that feeling that so many adolescents feel of just not it makes no sense that they're part of this universe makes no sense to them. They don't feel a part of it. Just parenthetically, I know there are a lot of parentheses, but because they're alienated and they are this kind of person, they're going to believe that they ought to be somewhere else, not at school in Leeds, but somewhere else. And that somewhere else, I sort of designate in my own mind as the International Bohemian Highway. That is, those places where creative people gather and get to know each other and want to go to. Of course, Paris, London, New York, those kinds of places being stops on the International Bohemian Highway. So this poor 14-year-old who's stuck as a freshman learning things he doesn't want to learn may already be dreaming about Paris or London or New York, dreaming about getting away from this life that he's leading. So to circle all the way back around, this creative kid is going to be at odds with his society, and he's going to have no way to make use of his potential. And this is one of the sad things about, this is not about culture doing it to him, but really sort of the nature of developmental psychology. If you're 5 or 7 or 9 or 11 or 13, you don't really have the way to make great use of your potential. You can't quite write a novel yet. If you're Mozart, you're already producing symphonies, but there's one Mozart per 3 trillion people. Most kids are not yet able to manifest their potential. So they're doing things that are rote and boring, maybe getting good grades, but they're internally upset that they're not getting to really make use of themselves. As a next parenthesis, if we want to talk about how to help these kids or help creative kids, it's to give them stuff worthy of them to do. Give them big projects, give them things that sound outlandish, ask them to solve world peace. give them something rich enough to bite into so they can really make use of themselves rather than the small historical facts or 2 + 2 stuff that they're obliged to learn. So I think I'm just going to trail off here and act like there's an actual period here because I'm not sure where the period is, but let me just trail off there for a moment.
And right, okay, so now we've got children, we've got adolescents who don't fit, say, the normal curve when it comes to education. From what you're saying,
Yes.
they hide, they mask what their feelings are, and I know this is particularly pertinent for, especially for girls, which is why now autism in girls is becoming more and more identified, because
more and more labeled.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Yeah, more and more labeled. That's all right. Just checking that you're listening.
Yes.
And therefore, what it means is that the whole of the education system is not just in the United Kingdom, this is worldwide. We've got an education system which is trying to cram us all into the same box.
That's right.
And we've been doing this for centuries, surely.
That's right. So let me speak to a few related points. This child, whether a child or an adolescent, this person, this creative person, is going to be naturally more despairing than the next child and naturally more anxious than the next child. And I'll explain why. There's a why here. There are reasons for this. It's not that they have the mental disorder of depression or the mental disorder of generalized anxiety. There are reasons. They are more anxious because they've set the bar higher than other kids. They're the ones at the recital who really wants to hit the right notes. They've already got into their heads that there are excellent ways to do things and poor ways to do things. And they want to be on the side of excellent things. That provokes anxiety. To want to be good or even the best provokes anxiety. Very often it's performance anxiety, but there are all kinds of anxieties associated with having a vision of what's beautiful, what's fair, what's just, having values, and then wanting to uphold those values, being idealistic. This child is idealistic typically. But then there's even a deeper reason why anxiety threads through this child. If he or she is already trying to be creative, trying to do something creative, that means that she's on some project. Let's just call it a short story to have something to talk about. So she's trying to write a short story. And the creative process is essentially making one choice after another. That's what the process is. Send your character to Zanzibar, send your character to Paris, put a comma in, take a comma out. It's one choice. There's nothing there until you make a choice. And choosing provokes anxiety. The very act of having to choose makes one anxious, which means that the whole creative process makes one anxious. Not gigantic anxious like fear of flying or something, not a panic attack anxious, just anxious enough to feel anxious. And so what happens for many creative people, what most human beings do when they feel anxious is they flee the encounter. They get out of there. They stop doing the thing that's making them anxious. So we have, in the lives of creative children, so many failed pursuits, so many starting learning the guitar or starting this or starting that or what have you, because anxiety arose and they didn't like the feeling of that anxiety. And so they fled the encounter. And now they have a disappointment and a regret to deal with, often in a lifelong way. And they begin to start bad-mouthing themselves. Oh, I can't complete things. Why is it I start short stories and don't finish them? So they start to get this self-identity piece of, I like to call it a God bug identity. That is, they're full of themselves. They've come into the world full of themselves. They think that they're talented and have all of these qualities and resources. They're full of themselves. That's the God side. And then they start failing at all these actual activities. They drop the guitar, or they don't finish the short story. And they start to feel small like a bug. And this tension goes on in I think, in creative people, lifelong, this God bug tension between, wow, I'm wonderful, and wow, why am I doing so poorly and doing such poor work, etc. So that was just a long-winded way of saying anxiety is going to be present in this child's life. You don't want to diagnose it. You don't want to affix a diagnosis like generalized anxiety or something to a child just because she's creative and has to deal with the creative process. It's unfair to put a label on there. So that's A, anxiety. B, this child is going to be more despairing than the next child because she is pestered by questions of meaning that 92% or 97% of her peers aren't. She needs to know that what she is doing matters somehow. She's going to have this lifelong conversation about, is this important to do? Does this matter? Is this value-based work? Am I doing the right stuff? And almost nothing in life is devised to satisfy her meaning needs. The world is not set up to meet her meaning needs. So she's not going to get the experience of meaning from what she's doing, and that's going to make her sad. She's going to have this experience, this feeling of existential despair, that she's alienated and isolated, and that the stuff that she gets to do just does not feel important enough. So apart from all the other psychological reasons we could talk about why a given child might despair, apart from all of those, there's this essential question of, do I matter? And is what I'm doing important enough? And if the answer is no, and it will be no for so many kids because what they're doing isn't important enough, then they'll think that they're really not important in the universe and not making use of themselves. Just one other tie into this idea. Kids grow up in families, and families matter. There's a big literature on the authoritarian personality. I think many of your listeners may know that. That grew up in the 1950s. It's associated with a fellow named Adorno, and he and his colleagues at the University of California at Berkeley tried to figure out who Hitler's followers were. They were not so interested in who Hitler was, but they were curious about why so many tens of millions of Germans followed Hitler. So they tried to figure out some distinction between authoritarian leaders and authoritarian followers. So a big literature grew up in the 1950s. But they were interested in political stuff, not familial stuff. So they did not investigate authoritarians in the family. And that's the work I've been doing over the years, is looking at authoritarians in the family. I've put out an authoritarian wound questionnaire out in cyberspace that people fill out. This is all part of my interest in parents who bully. So if you have this strong-willed, strong-minded kid, this creative kid with lots of power inside of her, lots of chi, lots of roiling thoughts, and put that inside an authoritarian family, and pundits will claim that 25% of the population is authoritarian by nature, that means you have probably a 50-50 chance that your mom or your dad is an authoritarian personality. So this child is going to butt heads with this bully, and that's going to be part of the ongoing dynamic where maybe the child will be not metaphorically, but literally beaten into submission with those lifelong consequences, or will find the ways to never be at home, or to find the way to divorce herself from her family because she can't tolerate the interactions there. I know there isn't quite a center to what I'm saying, but let me just circle around to the points I was trying to make, and that is you can expect more anxiety in the life of a creative adolescent and more, so to speak, depression in the life of a creative adolescent than among other kids for these reasons, and many more if we had time we could chat about.
I'm going to make the same mistake twice. I've unmuted myself. Eric, you've painted a world of regulation almost.
Yep.
So let's take that regulation away and go blue sky and go into the world of Eric. Eric, how would you change this?
Oh, really blue sky?
Really blue sky.
People would be nicer. Parents would be nicer. Parents would actually love their children, as opposed to paying lip service to the idea that they love their children. Children would be given lots of interesting projects to work on, whatever interested them, whether it was science or art or music. They'd be not pressured to perform, but given interesting, let's call them assignments or projects to help them flourish. They would be given as much literal space as is humanly possible to run in the field, so to speak, to deal with this natural energy, which is not ADHD stuff, but natural energy. They have a lot of energy, so there need to be outlets for the energy. I would sit down with my child in a blue sky world and talk about serious matters right from the get-go, not talk down to the child, not patronize the child. This child we're talking about is smart already at the age of 5 or 6 or 7. This child is wise already. Let me just tell you an anecdote. So my mom, I lived with my mom. I grew up with my mom alone, the two of us. And she would often bring me the problems of her friends for me to solve. I was maybe 5 or 6 or 7. So she'd report on her friends' problems. And what do you think Bob and Mary should do? And so I remember one, which was the wife wanted the window open during the summer to let the air in, but the husband didn't want bugs coming in. So I said, in my 5-year-old wisdom, screens. Put up screens. You can invite any smart 5-year-old or 6-year-old or 7-year-old is a great problem solver already, and it just is given no problems to solve. So those are among the things. I mean, exposure to resources. In the United States during the 1940s, Roosevelt started something called the WPA, the Works Project Association, which was a way to employ millions of unemployed people somehow. He just would find jobs for people. And many of our many American libraries got built during this time, and many things got done by virtue of this WPA idea. One of the things that happened was that there was lots of money for research that hadn't gone on previously. And there was lots of interesting research around the difference between creative kids and intelligent kids. This is not a subject you can talk about anymore. It's like it's so woke or non-woke or whatever the language is supposed to be, but you sort of can't talk about the difference between intelligence and creativity. But teachers were asked to identify the kids in their class who they thought were intelligent, but not creative, versus the kids they thought in the class were creative and also usually intelligent, but not necessarily the smartest kids, just the most creative. Fascinating distinctions. The intelligent but not creative kids needed to know what was on the test. They were always pestering the teacher, what's going to be on the test. They wanted to know what professions made the most money. They were already conventional. The creative kids scored, metaphorically, 2 standard deviations above the mean on not caring about money, not caring about professional status, just wanting to do interesting things. So that's all by way of saying this creative kid wants to do interesting things and is ready at that young age to do interesting things. That's why the prodigies of the world, the Mozarts and the Picassos, when they have this overbearing parent who's demanding that they learn something at the age of 3 or 4, they get so good at it because they're primed even at 4 or 5 or 6 to be good at this sort of stuff. So in my blue sky world, I think the headline for my blue sky world is be nice, but also make make offers to kids that allow them to be as rich and big as they already are at 5 or 6 or 7 or 8.
Thank you. And so therefore our entire society is hardly set up for that, is it? I suppose that's why it's Eric's Blue Sky World.
That's right.
Okay, so let's just look at those two sides of it, the regulated side in which we live and Eric's Blue Sky World.
Yep.
And see how we can find common ground there, or at least how can we move towards your Blue Sky World.
Well, since we're interested in adolescent coaching, in the idea of coaching, we could just stay there for a moment, and that is, to the extent that the model can shift, that the helping model can shift from the psychiatric model to the coaching model, that in itself would be a wonderful thing. The psychiatric model, as I've mentioned, is, to my mind, not real medicine. It's illegitimate. By the way, just parenthetically, if you think about it, the typical amount of time that a psychiatrist spends with a new patient is 15 minutes. What could possibly go on in 15 minutes beyond a checklist - prescription? Nothing else could possibly go on. There could be no inquiry into what's going on in your life or anything except quick, let's get some symptom picture named. And at any rate, that's off to the side. But the shift from the mental disorder psychiatric model to the coaching model would be wonderful. And it would be lovely if the modesty of the coaching model could be underlined to the world. That is, that all we're trying to do is be of a little help. We don't have these grandiose diagnosing and treating ideas. We're not acting like we understand what's going on. They're acting like they understand. The other side is acting like they understand, but they don't, of course, because there's no investigations into causation. But if we could make this shift to the simple idea of what would be of a little help in a given situation. Give a simple example. You're a coach and a human being and understand how life goes, and mom brings in her son for coaching, whatever that might mean in a particular context, and kid is suddenly more anxious than he'd been the week before or the month before. Suddenly the kid's more anxious. You're an adolescent coach dealing with an anxious kid. In the psychiatric model, you're already starting to tick off boxes and heading towards an anxiety diagnosis and a pill. That's where you're already going. The coaching model, you're going to inquire of the kid, of both the parent and the kid. What's changed? What's going on? And I'm pausing here for effect because you want some space for a child or a parent to have a chance to actually think about what's going on. The parent may say, absolutely nothing different. I mean, we did move Johnny's sister in with him last week. They're sharing a room now. They weren't doing that before, but of course that doesn't matter, right? And a normal human being coach would say, of course such things matter. That's a big change in Johnny's life. And that's not to say that you want to separate them again, but you have to take into account that this is a new life for Johnny now that he's sharing his room with Susan. So let's try to brainstorm. Johnny, what would work for you? Do you need a curtain up between you and Susan, or what do you need to make this transition work, etc.? It's real inquiry. It's like what's going on, nothing fancy, nothing medical sounding, just what's going on, what's changed, what's new, and what would you like to try? Those are our twin endeavors, to be of a little help and to inquire, what would you like to try? Nothing fancy, what would you like to try? And in my work with clients, for you were not going to say how long I've been coaching to spare me an age question, but it's a long time. In these 35 or 40 years of working with clients or more, I've never had a client, when asked, what might we try? Have nothing to say. Well, sometimes I'll take that back. Sometimes they're in such a state of despair that they really don't know what to try. Then I might want to offer some suggestions or be of more help. But most often, the client brings up a situation and we've got some clarity as to what the situation is. My paintings aren't selling well enough, or I'm blocked on my novel, or whatever it is that my creative clients are coming to me with, whatever it is. My response will be, yeah, you're in a tough situation. What would you like to try? So to circle all the way back around to what would help, just asking of the participants, the parents, the siblings, the, so to speak, identified patient, the kid, asking of them, what's going on? And what would you like to try? And then we move into planning and goal setting and accountability and support and other kinds of pieces of the puzzle of coaching. We then move to some place and continue the work of coaching. But the primary thing would be to inquire as to to get a picture of what's going on, and then to ask, what would you like to try? And then from there, monitor the person's efforts at whatever they've said they would like to try. That's my simple vision of what would help a lot.
Perhaps it's a very accurate vision of that. You're bringing in here not just coaching with the child, but coaching with the adult, coaching with the family, perhaps. Perhaps this is something that we should be pushing more, because an awful lot of this is, we want to keep the child to one side and keep the adult to one side because we want to know what the child thinks. But here,
I think both are true. That's right. I think both are true. It's not easy to have a family in the room. I started out as a family therapist before I became a creativity coach. And I don't think any family therapist finds it particularly easy to have a full family in the room and trying to negotiate who gets to speak and something comes up that sort of takes over the session, or somebody has a particular grievance. So it's hard work. It's very hard work. I think it takes a lot of rough experience to know how to deal with a family. So I could see a giving coach being a little leery of inviting whole families in just because they're so hard to deal with. But if you can do that kind of work, there's like nothing better than that in the universe of helping than to actually have the whole family in and maybe finally hear Johnny's grievance, or finally have the whole family understand what's been going on, or how the changes that have recently happened have affected the whole family. It's wonderful if that work can get done. Of course, if a given coach doesn't feel up to that, I would not chastise a coach for not feeling up to that, because it's hard work, and maybe just working with the individual child is the next best thing.
Thank you so very much indeed. I'm not going to ask any more questions unless it all goes blank, and I do have a couple more questions. But can I now throw it open to the floor and
Sure.
and ask all these people who've been listening to your every word what questions they might have for you?
Absolutely.
Right. Who's first then? Well, we stunned you into submission. Okay, looks like we've stunned them into submission. Well, either that or you've explained everything. Oh, Marion, you've come up.
Well, let me just piggyback on one of the ideas that we were chatting about, and that's this racing brain stuff, which of course nowadays used to be called mania. Now it gets embedded into bipolar. But if you just think about it, a smart kid is going to have a brain that wants to work, that wants to race, like a locomotive going down the tracks at a high speed. And it is not necessarily entirely in the child or the adolescent's control. Then we get negative obsessions, unproductive obsessions, that sort of stuff, because the brain is racing. And so it would be of great help for a coach to understand how to think about what can be done with a child whose brain is racing, different from calling it bipolar and suggesting medication, different from that. Thinking about how to canalize put in a channel, put in a canal, that energy. And that might be nowadays for kids, very often it's video games. The kid who's ADHD over here is completely immersed in something over there if it's a video game. No trouble paying attention at all. But we would like the kid to be involved in something maybe more productive or healthy or whatever than video games. So part of the work that we can do is to try to figure out what a child loves. Most kids love something. It might be science, it might be music, it might be visual stuff, it might be film, whatever it is, to inquire as to what the child loves, and then to use that information about what the child loves to help him or her aim energy in that direction, so that she's making use of her racing brain in productive ways. I believe that we have both productive obsessions and unproductive obsessions. Both of those are part of our repertoire. We don't want the unproductive ones, but we do want the productive ones, because that's the way our brain wants to organize itself. Our brain wants to think about something hard, wants to bite into something, wants to give something its real consideration. So if you can help a child at any age find the thing, if it's a detective series to read, whatever it is, that child is going to want to, this child that we've been talking about, this smart, creative, diverse child that we're talking about, is going to want to consume that. They're going to read every mystery by that author, read 100 mysteries by that author. It's going to get completely involved in that, and that will, to use oddly strong language, save that child's life, by virtue of having had the experience of being really interested in something for a portion of childhood. We have those memories of being really interested in something for portions of childhood. And those adventures, those excursions really helped us survive. So this is all by way of saying, if an adolescent is showing that extra energy profile, instead of leaping to ADHD or some label, try to have a conversation with the child around, what do you love, and how can we have you have more of that love?
Thank you, Eric. Marion, you had a question.
Yes, hello. Thank you for everything you've said so far. I've been a teacher for 40 years. This is not a view that schools have. It is not a view that teachers have.
No.
Just, if individuals like me do have this view, where could we start in a school?
I've had ideas about that, but I don't believe that any of them would actually work. So these are blue sky ideas. But most schools, at least in the United States, maybe worldwide, pay lip service to the idea that they want to teach critical thinking skills, that's one of the things that they're supposed to be doing. If a piece of time could be carved out in the day where kids come to, rather than music or art, but to a critical thinking, called something sexier than that, but critical thinking time, where they're invited to think of something big. I think that if a new half hour a day could be carved out where kids come and are presented with the biggest questions in the world, I think that would start to energize kids and allow them to make use of some of this unused potential. It's not a complete answer, but if the question is what's a little something to do, then I think that carving out a new half hour in the day where kids are invited to think big would be lovely. Mm. And also, this is again a small thing, but in many schools are beginning to cut back on recess and playtime and other simple just community activities that the kids do for all kinds of reasons, because there's more curriculum being taught or what have you. Give them more air. I would just say that's one of the things that kids need. They need to run around the playground. And that sounds simple, but if you completely take that away from kids where there's suddenly no recess, you're just sitting there all day long. That's a pretty morose experience. So those are just a couple of simple ideas. I have no super dramatic ideas, but just there are small things to try.
We're up against a system that's very entrenched, really, as we've said,
right.
for generations.
And
So-
here, I'm sure you know, here it's getting stupider and stupider, more dumbing down, more books actually banned. Who would have thought that we would come to a time when books would be banned? But that's what's happening here in this country. So not only is it more and more regimented, it's also more and more stupefied. So, and the disparities between the very smart, what we would call private schools, you would call public schools. I think that the disparity between the specialty schools and the everyday schools the gap is going to grow wider and wider as smart parents know that they can't send their kids to the other schools. They have to be sent to the good schools. So.
Well, thanks, Eric. Can I just add one rider to your idea of critical thinking, which I think is wonderful, and that is that it is non-assessed.
Oh, and it's absolutely not assessed. That it's absolutely not assessed. In fact, well, treats would be nice. I would give treats to the wildest ideas rather than the best ideas. Forget about best and worst, but just what's really, which do we think was the most interesting idea? Which do we think was the most outlandish idea? I'd give that one the cookie.
But it shouldn't be ticking the box, examined to death and things like that.
And right and wrong. And let me just spend a minute. I think maybe we have 1 minute. In the creative person's life, all day long, they're supposed to do things right. Like every human being, they're supposed to pick up their kids at 3 and mow the lawn and do things right. And then a moment is supposed to come where their mind is supposed to switch somehow, and they're supposed to have complete permission to make mistakes and messes. That's the creative process. The creative mind is permission to make mistakes and messes. It's not easy to get from one mind to the other. All day long, we're supposed to get things right, all human beings. Now a time's supposed to come where we have permission to put a salmon with a skyscraper and make a salmon-shaped skyscraper or something outlandish. And most kids at 3 and 4 or 5 won't balk, but as soon as they've been touched by school, they're going to start to balk at doing something outlandish. They themselves would be made nervous by being invited to do something outlandish. So they need help to see outlandishness as not only okay, but the beautiful thing it is. Because in old-fashioned language, that's imagination. And kids are not invited to use their imagination much. They're asked to use their memory and other skills, but not their imagination that much.
Well, there's a challenge for all of us.
That is a challenge for all of us. And for my adult clients, I invite them to, my metaphor is to walk around the lake. That is to have more time just being open to one's own interesting ideas, rather than sitting there tightly wanting an idea to come, but to be more open and to wander around, so to speak. Like in the French, there's the word flaneur, the idea of a person who wanders around, typically Paris, just watching, just being open to experiences. We need more flaneurism in our schools.
And the schools would say whether we had the time.
And the money and the inclination and the anything. That's right.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. Great. Any other questions, please? Well, I hope that you have enjoyed this. Eric, I've got to say thank you so much indeed for all of your last hour. This has been absolutely tremendous. I've been sort of riveted to my chair and keep on forgetting to hit the mute switch. But apart from that, it's been absolutely wonderful to hear your side of it and to go away from what could be just the standard process that we've all probably been through. And now we're wondering whether that process is the correct process, because that's what's been required of us throughout our lives.
That's right.
So wouldn't it be lovely if there was an education, I'm going to say volte-face here, an about turn, which would actually allow many more people to think more laterally, out of the box, and things like that. Less talking about boxes, less box ticking, less exams, but more chance to just explore, perhaps.
That's right. And to piggyback on the main idea of coaching, namely being of a little bit of help, I think any little things we can do for individual human beings, individual kids, individual adolescents, it would be nice to change systems, but it is also relevant that we help one other human being occasionally. So we can always go to that focus. If we're not sure how to change the universe, we can help one person.
I did.
But by help-
I once told a head that I teach English. I was helping the students to think philosophically. He told me that was not my job. Shocking,
Indeed.
deeply
Indeed.
shocking.
What a surprise.
What a
Yes,
surprise, yeah.
that's what we're up against. That's right.
So perhaps English or whatever main language is taught in schools should just be retermed communication.
Yes.
And
Perhaps
there's
perhaps mathematics should be problem solving.
my twin 6-year-old granddaughters talk in Fox. They've made up a language, and I apparently can talk in Fox too, whatever I say, except I'm always saying rude things in Fox. I have no idea what I'm saying. They won't tell me what I'm saying, except that was rude. So that was off point.
Hi, maybe I could ask a question before we end.
Sure.
Yeah, Rosemary.
Yeah, I came in a bit late, so this just in case that I'm hoping to watch the recording later. I'm sure the beginning was quite insightful, but just the last end when you were talking about Eric, you're talking about the thing. Sorry, first of all, I'm from Kenya, and yes, my name is Rosemary. Yes, and I coach teenagers and adolescents, young adults as well. So one of the things that I found in the practice is that I get the sense that we are the teachers and the people in positions of management or power are of a completely different generation compared to the young people coming in, and therefore it is speaking to parents. You spoke a little bit earlier saying the importance of coaching the parents as well, and that's what every time I deal with young people, I realize actually I should be coaching the parents. The children are fine, the parents are the ones who need coaching. And every time I think about it, I realize is because we believe this is this is what success looks like to us.
That's right.
It looks like
That's
this,
exactly
like this,
right.
like this. And therefore, if anyone comes in, if the children come to us in a different way, because they are completely in a different generation and the way they think and the way they view, we really, really don't even give them the time of day. This is the way to operate. This is the only way it can survive. And in Kenya specifically, it's extremely academic. It's tick. If you don't get this marks, it's it's really, really, that's what success looks like. Yeah. And we've adopted it as parents and sharing that. So the kids are literally drowning, trying to come out to express themselves. And if they don't fit in our box, then they're trouble children. Then they're considered as trouble. Then of course we label them, more and more in the current years, we've been giving them, ADHD and all that kind of stuff. And you can feel their desperation, the children's desperation to be heard or to try and fit. Sometimes they try and fit just so that they please everybody, the parents and everybody, but they really, really struggle. So I feel sometimes it's just a shame is that the people who are making the decisions for this generation are just clueless, honestly. And we're raising this generation who, honestly, we need to learn from. I think AI helps because I think we are more
That's
open.
right. And they don't have a good sense of what pressure does. If you were to say to the adult, well, I think I'm going to give you 90 more jobs at work, how would you enjoy that? They go, God, no, I don't want, that would put me under so much stress. Well, think about what's going on with your kid with clarinet practice and needing to take advanced class. It's all pressure. This is not, it's not that the distinction is not between fun and pressure. It's between life-harming pressure and ordinary pressure. If you move into life-harming pressure, you're going to get a sad or an anxious or a defeated child. That's what you're going to get. So all I'm saying is what you're saying, just said over again. And that is, parents do need to understand that it's not okay to just keep pressuring kids as if there were no effects from pressure. We all, how many millions of books have come out about stress and what stress does, and yet parents somehow still don't get the message that stress kills or stress harms. So all I'm doing is agreeing with you.
Ina, did you have a message, a question?
I just wanted to share at the end. Thank you so much, Eric and Ian. I just wanted to share that when I was in school as a kid, my teacher told me I had too much of an imagination. I wear it as a badge of honor.
Exactly. Exactly. And an awful lot of kids, especially if they're growing up in authoritarian households, they're going to take that message in and they're really going to shut down their imagination. They're going to take all of these messages in and be harmed by these messages. So I'm glad you were not.
Excellent.
Mm.
Is there any other questions or otherwise?
I have an interesting anecdote, actually. I just remembered when I was in elementary school, I moved from one city to another in 5th grade. Like the past city that I lived in, it's considered a good public schools. They had a good education rating. And then when I moved to a different city, it was considered more of a city type public school. So not as good in the education rating. That was just the word of mouth. And when I went to the new city school, they placed me in a classroom where they were teaching math from 4th grade. So things that I've already learned last year. And the classroom, like all the kids, my classmates, they would never respond to the questions of the teacher. So it was easier for me to kind of stand out because I would always be raising my hand. And then eventually my teacher spoke to the principal. I'm sorry, I think I kind of got disconnected. Okay. Then my teacher spoke to my principal and they moved me to another class in the middle of the year, to a class that was more engaging with the teacher. And what's funny is that my family like insisted that I should be in a different classroom in the beginning, but they had to try me out in the classroom that was not as engaging at first. And it was obvious visually to see the kids that were not engaging as well with the teacher versus the kids who were engaging with the teacher in the other classroom. And I think that was just an eye-opener when I like getting into middle school, is that I felt that adults didn't listen to me. Like they would decide this is what you do, even if you advocate for yourself. Like, no, I did this last year. I want to do this. They would place you where they believed they were the experts. This is where you belong. And until you prove yourself otherwise, then you'll be moved up. It was just an eye-opener as a kid.
I know we're over time, Ian, but I just wanted to piggyback one thought, and that is in the millions of classes I've taken over the years to get many degrees, I've been always shocked by how incurious students are in all of these classes, how virtually no, I'd be the one raising my hand every 3rd second. What did you mean by that? And gee, that went by fast. And you're saying I'd be such a pest. But nobody else seemed to be, they just were marking time to get the professional degree they needed to get out the other side to. So I think it's the incuriosity of human beings is a little startling. And that's why when we're talking about creative individuals or what have you, we're talking about a small subset of the whole human race, because most of the race doesn't want to do this. They just want to get on with it, whatever it is, and not raise their hands, so to speak.
Mm.
Oh, and she's raising her hand.
For the last 10 years, I've been working in pupil referral units. This is for children who are excluded from school. They certainly ask you questions.
That's right.
You
Isn't
cannot
that
get away with saying anything if they
That's
don't
so
get
interesting.
Miss,
That's right.
what do you mean by that? Miss,
That's
how
right.
can you say that?
That's right. And sometimes it's from curiosity, sometimes it's from oppositionalness.
Sometimes
But
it's our position, yes. But it's
But-
interesting that when you apply for a job, it says dealing with children with challenging behavior, as
Mhm.
though it's a negative thing. But
Yeah,
I always
that's
think
right.
those children have done well for themselves because
I
they've
think
got
that's so
themselves out
interesting.
of mainstream school.
That's right. I think that's so interesting.
And it's a transition period. We're supposed to get them back in, but they don't
And
want to go back
in the
in.
school they left are all of their pacified classmates sitting there, not raising their hands.
But often if they're sent back in, they say, oh, I'll see you in a couple of weeks, miss. They know how to get
That
themselves
would have
out.
been me. That would have been me too. I had the really terrible habit of, if I didn't like a class, I would whistle in the background. I'd whistle tunes. I did get into a lot of trouble being the unpleasant kid in the class.
Michael, you've raised your hand. Eric, can we take another one?
Sure, of course.
Yes, thank you very much, and apologies for not having the camera. It's ringing from Melbourne, Australia. It's 3 o'clock in the morning here. My question
Welcome.
is, I have a kid who's sort of sounds very similar to the kind of descriptions you started the session with, and on top of some of the difficulties that you described for these kids to be in school.
Yep.
Of course, this is a generation that went through almost a year long of lockdown,
Absolutely.
and then sort of got exposed to way too much screen at the time, and now it's very hard to wind back. And so I'm just wondering your thoughts about the impact of screens on the mind as such. And I recall a particular study, I think, that I read somewhere, where they suggest that every extra hour in the day of using a screen, sort of tends to sort of throw them further into the ADHD sort of box, and whatnot. So just your thoughts about the whole,
I
sort
don't,
of
well, I
parenting
mean,
and screen and all
obviously,
that.
I don't think I have thoughts different from what any kind of right-thinking person would have about how too much screen time is not okay. From a brain standpoint, it strikes me that it's going to be harder for the generation of kids who have been on screens so much, and especially dealing with media that goes by so quickly, the TikTok text message kind of fastness of the universe. It's going to be hard for them to have big ideas because their neurons are not going to be trained to regroup around big ideas. Simply put, every thought or every interaction with the world that a human being has means that neurons are grabbed for that reason. 100 million neurons here, 100 million neurons there. That's what thinking is. It's the grabbing of those neurons. Well, we have a profligate number of neurons, billions and billions, but if you steal away 100 million every time, you end up with not a lot of neurons for real thinking. So I don't know what this is going to mean down the road, if we're going to have poorer thinkers, even among our best, even if I wonder if our best thinkers will be poorer thinkers by virtue of this. I don't know. I would just say one thing on the side, since you're in Australia, you might find the writings of Martin Whiteley interesting. I don't know if you know him, but he was an Australian legislator who sort of saw through ADHD, stopped believing in it, demanded that there be less diagnosing of it, that there'd be more proof that it was a real thing, etc. And he's kind of, in a way, changed at least a portion of the Australian landscape around ADHD diagnosing. So and I think he has a new book out about ADHD as an industry and not a medical reality.
I'll check it out. Thank you very
You
much.
do. I think he's an interesting guy and well worth knowing about.
Okay.
Can
Thank
I
you.
ask a question as well? Hello. Just one.
Sorry, I missed the beginning.
Can I ask one more question?
Oh, yes, sure, of course.
So I have an 8-year-old son. He's amazing. He's very creative and imaginative and reading a lot and a lot
Yep.
of stuff. I want, if it's possible, an advice or something, how I can communicate with my lovely husband. So in which way, like he repeating almost a lot of times this phrase, can you be normal, please sit down, can you go to school, do your homework and be more like calm, or and always I'm asking, what do you mean be a normal kid? He's like jumping, singing, a lot of energy.
Yeah, you know that won't work. That way won't work.
I just want a phrase or maybe a book. Maybe
Here's the
something.
phrase. It's going to sound a little over the top, but this is the phrase. He's perfect as he is.
Okay. It's just I want to
You
explain.
can't, it's like arguing politics or religion or this or that. It can't be argued. There are camps. There are people in different camps. So protect your son from that energy, from the you're not okay energy. Keep telling him he's okay. You're great. You can do anything. Keep using your brain, keep whatever. And keep telling your husband he's perfect. Stop it.
Okay, I hope it'll work, but sometimes it's not easy.
I know, of course. I mean, I'm half making a joke, but I'm also not making a joke in that you can't really argue. You can't argue change into existence, really.
I want just
You could show him. I mean, I have a new book out called, it's expensive because it's from a professional house, but it's called Deconstructing ADHD. If he's willing to read, there are a ton of books out there
I can explain to him, show him, prove him. So he needs kind of change his mind or change the attitude and to understand that, look, it's okay to be very excited, be emotional, show your emotional. I understand he's a little bit like introvert and keeping everything inside. And but my son is not like this. So you said that deconstructing
ADHD. As I say, it's a pretty expensive book, but there are lots of books on the market that speak to this. What does I actually have a lot of blog posts on my Psychology Today. My Psychology Today blog is called Rethinking Mental Health, and I remember doing one around sort of like the 21 definitions of normal or something, trying to do some explaining around what a ridiculous word that is and how it ought to be abandoned. The whole subject of abnormal psychology should be abandoned.
Okay, I will look definitely, because this is getting a little bit too much. So he needs to read, do a lot of things. Now it's the space time. It's not anymore Pokemon. So space, and he will be go to space to change the world. He will close the school.
That's right.
He'll be the prime minister. And sometimes my husband said, "Stop talking nonsense," and I don't like it.
No, that's right. You have to say to him, "You're looking at the next prime minister."
Yeah, okay, I'll try to do that. Thank you very much for
welcome.
That. Okay.
I think we've got to draw a close there. Stella, thank you so much indeed for that. It's very, very important, actually. Eric, how can we thank you? That was absolutely wonderful. Yes, we have run on, but it's almost as if, when the party got underway, it really got going, didn't it? And that's wonderful. And I'm afraid I've got to stop it. But perhaps it's better to, like all good parties, perhaps it's better to quit while you're ahead.
That's right. So we don't have
we all go away having had a wonderful time. And
thank you so much.
Perhaps we'll have another one another time.
Happy to do it.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.